Meanwhile, we have in the news today, U.S. warplanes head to the Gulf at rate not seen in years. That's according to Debka file, another kind of shadowy, nebulous intelligence source, so take it with a grain of salt. But what are we dealing with here? Regional conflicts where the bankers back all sides of the war. As the U.S. and Israel carried on bickering over the right time to strike Iran's nuclear sites, Debka file writes, the war preparations continue to pace. Debka file's military sources report that flight after flight of U.S. warplanes and transports were seen this week cutting eastward through the skies of Sinai on their way to the Gulf destinations, presumably Saudi Arabia, at a frequency not seen in the Middle East for many years. Of course, we know there are many big cruise ships there, big launching pads, ally bases. All the regional players have been tapped, and we really hope this doesn't become World War III or a wider regional conflict. But they have on their hit list Iran and Syria, as I've mentioned many times tonight and other times on this program, and they look like they're going to go forward. We hope they don't do it. Now, some have interpreted Obama's comment that I don't think Israel has made a decision on what they need to do as simply meaning he wants to wait until the sanctions have the appearance of having had their effect before having the strike. We don't know, of course, what's going to happen. No one knows the hour, but we know they're working steadily at it. Meanwhile, Mossad works with terror groups to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists. That's Kurt Nemo's article up on Infowars today. Of course, he points out it's obvious that the Western intelligence agencies would have full knowledge if this is proven to be going on as well. There's sources from Iran's press TV citing the same, but these articles have been ongoing for 6 months. They've had attempts on Khomeini. They've had attempts on Ahmadinejad. They've been taking out these scientists, all these other explosions. And it's intelligence ops. There's evidence. It's connected to the Israelis. And you can see it there in the quotes. And they are arming and training and backing the MEK, the Mojahedin-e-Khalq organization, a known terrorist group listed with the State Department as a terrorist group. And yet we have open ties with them. Well, what do you expect? We're openly working with Al-Qaeda, first in Libya. Now those groups have been openly exported to Syria. They'll work with whatever they want and sell whatever lies are convenient to the public. It's just a sad day. Now, turning to the homeland front, sources expose FEMA training camp in Missouri. Alex had on this person today on the air, an anonymous source who's been contracted to work inside a facility at Fort Leonard Woods, Missouri, where he explains how there's been a lot of activity building towards the FEMA training camps. Now, we've reported in the weeks past how they are activating these camps, how KBR has put out bids seeking contractors, people to stand by on 72 hours notice, ready to man the camps at all levels, provide cleanup services, food, catering, but also the fencing services that they can roll out at rapid speed, get it ready to house people in whatever kind of crisis or emergency might be coming. Of course, with the economic crisis always on watch. He said also that he's describing it as a civilian inmate training camp, and told Infowars he spotted foreign troops as well in maroon and purple uniforms instructing troops on baton tactics and crowd control techniques. So again, this is obviously some form of training of dealing with the American people once the economic crisis or a new war or whatever hits that tipping point, that threshold, that turning point. He said there's been, quote, incredible activity at the camp since the passage of NDAA. And we've seen it in the propaganda and the other reports. It's sad, but that's what direction things are going. A little bit of positive news, at least on the surface. Janet Dung Beetle, as Alex now calls her, Napolitano, will have to testify before the House Subcommittee on Ignorance and Counterterrorizing in the House. EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center group, has gotten these hearings held on, after recently obtaining close to 300 pages of documents as the result of a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit detailing the federal agency's intelligence gathering practices on the web. Among the documents were guidelines for the DHS instructing outside contractors, there's those contractors again, to monitor the web for media reports and comments that, quote, reflect adversely on the agency or the federal government. So here you have the Homeland Stasi network, no longer fighting terrorism, admittedly, if they even ever were, if there even are terrorists, always just spying on the American people, legitimizing the destruction of the Bill of Rights under various pretexts. They'll sell whatever they think they can to the Republic to the public in what was once the Republic. Meanwhile, they're not only looking for, quote, threats and hazards and evidence of the next big threat, emerging threats, but also any media reports that reflect adversely on the U.S. government or DHS. Now, of course, we reported back in 2010 how DHS was spying on the drudgereport.com, how they were spying on Infowars.com. That came out in Reuters last month, how in early 2010, contractors were 24/7 monitoring Facebook, Twitter, Hulu, WikiLeaks, sites like Huffington Post, and that Drudge Report thing again for any sign of trolling the trolls, of calling out a occupying force for what it is, of saying, hey, that's unconstitutional, what that group is doing. I mean, how dare us? Now, it's great that Epic got these hearings held. They've come out on free speech and civil rights grounds, of course. Most of their work has been very good. But we have a problem because they're just going to keep going. They show no signs of letting up. People inside this subcommittee have already commented that they want Homeland Security to be monitoring the internet, monitoring blogs, social media for signs of, quote, the current or emerging threats. That would be Reps Jackie Spear and Reps Patrick Meehan, among others. If you think it's good to still contact your members and tell them not to do it. Meanwhile, let's just watch for this hearing. It's going to be Thursday, February 16th. DHS monitoring of social networking and media, enhancing intelligence gathering and ensuring privacy. Admittedly, they have fusion centers set up all across the country, merging with local and state law enforcement to spy on the people, political groups, on and on. You know the deal. But it's always fun to see the dung beetle on TV. And of course, there were reports in 2004 that Homeland Security actually hired the former Stasi spy chief Marcus Wolf from East Germany to work for Homeland Security. There's kind of some speculation over whether or not that's true, but hey, that's how they're acting. It may as well be true if it's not literally true. They've obviously adopted that model. They're trying to turn the American people against each other to create a nationwide snitch network. They have a little Infraguard and the other entities, and they really want to just create all-out paranoia. You've seen the reports this week from the FBI where they have page after page of mundane, ordinary American activity, using cash, going to internet cafes, using model airplanes, all kinds of stuff, tattoo shops, going to cosmetic shops, beauty shops. Everything the American people do is considered suspicious and the act of potential terrorism. You've seen all the reports. Just let's face what this is. It's an occupying force. It's disgusting what they have going on, and we should all be worried about it. Meanwhile, Paul Joseph Watson has written about how Homeland Security is now launching, quote, insurgent tracking drones inside America. And they're going to ramp this up on a big $50 million budget. Have these drones all over. They've already tapped law enforcement agencies, encouraged their use. You've seen the cases where the news media reported in Houston and other places that they were already testing and using these things. And you, of course, heard about the case in North Dakota where they used the drone to spy on the family with all the acreage that supposedly stole 6 cows. And I don't know if you did see the report also from this week where the European Union is now using drones to spy on and do farmland inspections because it's such vast farmland. They have to use these drones to find fines and things that are against the EU's code of bureaucratic dictatorship for farmland. Turning to other matters, the economic collapse always does these great list articles. This one is good, especially if you're a newbie to the broadcast or if you're spreading this broadcast to new listeners, people who haven't heard this before. It is the 10 things every American should know about the Federal Reserve, then kind of that Woody Allen asterisk, but we're afraid to ask or never knew or we're busy watching the football game and never asked. So here's that list now. I'll read all 10. The Federal Reserve System is a privately owned banking cartel. The truth is the privately owned central bank is owned by the banks that are members of the Federal Reserve System. We do not know how much of the system each bank owns because that has never been disclosed to the American people. No right to know. Number 2, the Federal Reserve System is a perpetual debt machine. You probably heard about that too, how every dollar issued comes back to the Federal Reserve in the form of interest. But there's some interesting quotes in here I've never heard, maybe you've never heard them, from Thomas Edison, of all people, back in the early part of the 20th century. He was in the New York Times at the time saying, that is to say, under the old way, Anytime we wish we could add to the national wealth, we are compelled to add to the national debt. Now, that's what Henry Ford wants to prevent. He thinks it's stupid, and so do I, that for the loan of $30 million of our own money, the people of the United States should be compelled to pay $66 million. That is what it amounts to with interest. That's double the amount of the loan and a little bit extra in interest. And he says it's bad, but somehow it's become accepted. We got used to it, didn't we? Number 3, the Federal Reserve has destroyed more than 96% of the value of the dollar. I know we have a graph, I don't recall who made it. It's been out there for years with the design of the dollar bill showing that destruction of the purchasing power of your dollar. You've heard Ron Paul talking about it, and it's true. You took what used to be the dollar when it was on a true gold standard, gold and silver standard in the early part of the 20th century, and how since 1913 it's had some ups and downs, but overall it's been a 96% decline of total value. Number 4, the Federal Reserve can bail out whoever it wants with no accountability. And the partial audit they finally got in Congress revealed that it's all the big banks of Wall Street and pretty much all the big banks of Europe. Go figure. Number 5, the Federal Reserve is paying banks not to lend money. Now, what does that mean? Section 128 of the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008 allows the Federal Reserve to pay interest on excess reserves that the bank parks at the Fed. So what happened? You had no excess reserves up until that act was passed in 2008. Now you have $1.5 trillion in there. The banks are putting the money in there, gaining interest payments, collecting their own money, and not loaning it out to people, not loaning it to small businesses, not allowing any kind of economic recovery. There isn't one. Paul Craig Roberts is going to talk about that later, what a hoax that is. Number 6, the Federal Reserve creates artificial economic bubbles that are extremely damaging. Do you remember that their whole mandate for being created was that they were going to stop the fluctuations, the spikes, the bust and booms, the market crashes? They didn't do any of that. The greatest crash ever, the economic depression of the late 20s, of the 30s, was created by the Federal Reserve. It wasn't stopped by them. They contracted the money supply and some other fishy moves after they crashed Wall Street. Number 7, the Federal Reserve System is dominated by the big Wall Street banks. Now, that should be obvious at that point, especially after the partial audit. However, I believe Jamie Dimon is on the board of reserves, and also, of course, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner came from there. At the very best, we're talking about a very, very corrupt revolving door system, but we know it's far worse than just revolving door problems. Number 8, it is not an accident that we saw the personal income tax and the Federal Reserve System both come into existence in 1913, so they could collect that interest money that Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and so many other Americans, whether they're good, bad, indifferent, colored, corrupt themselves, whatever. It was 1913 they began to turn the lights out on the American dream. Not that we were ever perfect, not that we ever achieved that dream, but they turned us instead towards that Soviet model, toward the rule by central authority model, rule by private entities controlling the government, not by a government responsible to the democratic people of the country through reserved, limited powers under a republic. Number 9, the current Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke, has a nightmarish track record of incompetence. Now, that can't be true. Number 10, the Federal Reserve has become way too powerful. Or was it always too powerful and completely unconstitutional? Crazy. But anyway, a listener sent us an interesting dollar here, some artwork. Ron Paul's face on a dollar bill, and it says, "And the Federal Reserve." I don't know if we could show that. Hopefully we can zoom in. Interesting artwork there. Just a little something extra for our viewers out there. We appreciate everyone supporting this broadcast and trying to spread the word. On the back it says, "In gold we trust." Interesting there. Anyway, that's it for tonight's Infowars Nightly News segment.